So I got the idea for this video from another YouTuber actually, and I thought it was a pretty interesting concept, and I thought I'd give my crack at it. So what it is how I would go back and learn programming again if I could start over, knowing what I know now. And I thought it was a really cool idea. The original video, I think she was more on the software side of it, but I'm going to be approaching it more from a hardware perspective. So I think that'll be interesting and make for an interesting video. So I'm going to kind of run through what my process, my journey was through programming, and given what that was, kind of how I would go back and change things if I could start over and do it again. So I think that'd be an interesting idea. It'll tie into another video I'll make later on, actually. I guess we can get started. I'll just kind of run through my history from it, the languages I learned, how I learned them, the stumbles I made. Hopefully someone can learn something from this video. I'm also thinking about making the top 5 programming languages you should learn before you graduate or something like that, or top 5 languages for business or something like that. I don't know. Let me know if you want to see that. I may make an interesting video as well. Alright, so when I started learning coding, I was a junior in high school, 17 years old and all starry-eyed, and so the first language I ever learned was C++, and that's actually not a bad language to start off with. So I did that for 1 year. I actually don't remember a lot of it because I've never used it since then. Now, the one thing I should note is that I learned C++ for an entire year. We actually, and this was on purpose, we were 17, so we skipped the chapter on pointers. We never learned those. So we learned everything else up until about, I think, we learned about functions, and then that was the first year. And then when I went to be a senior in high school, by this point I knew I wanted to do something computer related. I wasn't sure if it was computer engineering or computer science, but I wanted to do something with tech. So I took the other computer class that my school had. We didn't have too many. So the only thing was AP Computer Science, and we learned Java. Not JavaScript, just Java. And I hated it. Compared to C++, I really hated Java because we had to program between different class files, which I thought was very stupid and contrived, and I don't know why we couldn't just program within one file. Now, I kind of see the value of that, just being able to go between multiple files, because that's how projects work in the real world, but back then I was too naive and stupid to see it. So I ended up leaving high school with 2 years of programming experience, a year of C++ and a year of Java. Now we get to college, and freshman year, I take a class on MATLAB, and MATLAB was interesting. MATLAB, I think, it's actually really useful in your college courses, especially when you get to senior year, and especially if you ever want to do research. It's actually very, very useful because it's very, very good for doing modeling and graphing, and especially my area of emphasis is signal processing and working with signals and digital signal processing. Actually, being able to have a tool like MATLAB that can help you model out signals and waveforms is actually really, really useful to have, and it's actually, I've used it in some papers I've had to write, so that's very nice. And then after MATLAB began 4 long, arduous years of learning C, just C. And my experience learning C was probably one of the worst experiences I've ever had. Out of all the courses I took at college, anything C related was probably on my least favorite for that semester. I just was not a fan of C. Now there is one course I took sophomore year. We had to take a course on assembly. Assembly is even more stupid than C. I understand it was to give us an idea of, hey, you have to learn how programming languages work. You got to put this bit into this register, and bring them all together and everything. Assembly just was not fun, but I understand that you need to kind of, especially if you're computer engineering and working with hardware, you do need to understand how the C code interacts on a lower level. So I can understand that, giving you kind of an appreciation for how C code works closer to the hardware, because after assembly, it's not readable by humans, so I can understand that. We'll get back to C, because that was a very long course, a long series of courses, actually. The last one I really want to bring to mention was we took a course called Programming Systems, which is a very interesting class, actually. It teaches you how programming languages work. You have your syntax, and you have semantics. That's what I was looking for. Semantics, that's it. And then, you also learn the difference between a logical programming language versus a functional programming language versus an object-oriented programming language versus procedural functional programming language. And that was a good class because it kind of teaches you, not only are you learning programming, but kind of the why behind it. We learned OCaml and we learned Prolog. Prolog was interesting. OCaml was freaking stupid, all right? It just did not make a lot of sense the way it worked. Prolog was interesting. It kind of taught me a new way to think about how programming languages work, and I do like that. So that was my kind of the background. That's how I learned programming. So let's talk about how I would go back and start over if I could do it all again. All right, so if I could go back and do it all over again, I would probably start a little bit earlier. I started as a junior in high school. If I could go back, I probably would have started about maybe a year or two earlier, just to kind of dip my feet in and just get some of that initial exposure. You can never really start too early with those things. I mean, there are kids who are learning to program nowadays, so it really never is too early. I will say when I was younger, there probably were less online resources for kids learning to code than there are now, and that's only improving day by day, so, it's never too early to start. But if I could have started just a little bit earlier, I probably would. So let's kind of talk about how I would go through the process. So firstly, I would probably start with C. C would probably be the first language I ever took. And that's for a number of reasons. I think if you're ever touching code for an extended period of time, I do think at some point you do need to put your hands on C. It's just that when it comes to a programming language and programming in general, C is so foundational because it teaches you how programming languages work and how to program it. It makes you a better programmer if you learn how to use it. When you have things like pointers and malloc and calloc and realloc and free and all these other horrible, horrible things, what it does is it gives you a greater appreciation when you go to something like Python and you don't have to deal with all that bullshit. And, it basically makes you more, I guess, disciplined is what I'm trying to say. It helps you write code better. So I would definitely start with C, but I'd only do it for about a year because at the end of the day, C is good to learn, but you have to also understand that it's antiquated for a reason. A lot of the C code that is necessary has already been written. And, if you go look at a lot of jobs nowadays, there's not a huge demand for C. Typically, it'll say C/C++. And that brings me to my next step. After C, I would learn C++. I probably wouldn't have to take as long because there's a lot of overlap. But basically, it'll give you an idea of an object-oriented programming language, which is going to be very, very helpful. You borrow a lot from C, and you'll still have to use pointers, which it's always good to know about that. So you can have, memory management discipline, which is good. But that's something that I would learn is definitely an object-oriented programming language. And then I would probably take a while to kind of, do a few more languages. Java, that's something I did. I would probably do JavaScript. A scripting language would be nice. But then also after that, I would really focus on a language that I could work on for an extended period that would not only look good on my resume, but also would kind of help me hone my programming skill. And for that, I would probably choose Python. There's a reason why Python is sweeping over the industry. It's, number one, easy to program, and number two, it's very versatile. Those are the two biggest things that you need for a winning programming language. So I would probably choose Python to specialize in college, and that's probably mostly what I would learn. Now, talking about how college is structured and why they teach what they teach that's opening up a whole nother can of worms. They make us do a lot of C because computer engineers, a lot of them go into embedded systems and things that require these lower level languages. Like, we don't have a class at my college dedicated to Python. Like, if you want to learn Python, I think there's a couple classes that teach a little bit of it for like a project, but there's not a lot, like a class dedicated to getting your feet wet with Python, really. I just wish that we emphasized more of a variety, or emphasized with languages that were a little bit more, useful. I understand the appeal of C, and I understand that it's powerful, and, being very low level to hardware is good. But at the same time, one of the biggest strengths, one of the best things you can do as a programmer is have a very wide variety, a very versatile tool belt of languages that you can use at your disposal. And I just feel like I did not do that a lot. So that's what my kind of call would be, is, start with the basics, start with some C, kind of get an idea for how a programming language works, because C is going to teach you about your data types, your functions, all that. It's going to teach you about memory management, which would then be very useful if you decide to do embedded systems. And then if you want to do something like software development or web development, you can move on to a scripting language like JavaScript. You can move on to Python, which is really good for developing software. But the biggest thing is, never stop learning, basically. And also, don't limit yourself to just one language. The best thing you can do is have a wide variety. And that's what I really wish I could do if I could go back and do it again. But yeah, that's kind of my story. That's kind of what I would do differently. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you learn programming. Let me know what you would do differently down in the comments. If you found this video to be helpful, leave a like and subscribe, I guess. Other than that, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.